So thank you so much, Chris, for tuning in live from South Africa. Thank you, Angela, for distributing his wines in Virginia. Thank you all for tuning into this awesome event and believing with me that dry January just means to drink dry wines in January. I appreciate you all supporting vinoculture and supporting these boutique wine producers all over the world for these events. So first things first, just make sure if you've got all the wines and if you're tasting all of them, pour yourself a big glass of the Honeybunch. You're gonna need a big glass of the Honeybunch Chenin Blanc. And then I'm gonna introduce Chris and sip away while he's talking about his story, the story of his winery. Sip away, make your tasting notes in the chat room and ask any questions you have. This is your chance to ask the winemaker himself all the questions you have been dying to know. So without further ado, thank you so much, Chris, for tuning in from South Africa for us. And thank you for making such beautiful, beautiful wines. I'll turn it over to you to just give us a story of how you got to where you are now.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Kira. And yeah, thanks everyone for joining. It's nice to be doing a tasting again. South Africa at the moment is in full lockdown as well, and we've got a complete prohibition on any alcohol sales, so tastings haven't been happening for a long time. But yeah, great to see you guys, and thanks for having me and putting this together. So a little bit about Remhoogte. Well, it's a tough name to say. It's Dutch, which is a part of our heritage here in South Africa. So Cape Town began as the halfway stop-off point when ships used to sail around to the east, on the spice route from Europe. And the first colony was sort of officially started in 1652 by a Dutch guy. So the Dutch were the first to sort of colonize Cape Town, which is where we are. And so obviously a lot of that sort of heritage has kind of filtered down into names of farms, and we still speak Afrikaans today, which is a derivative of Dutch. And so that's where the name comes from, Remhoogte. So the literal translation, rem are brakes, like the brakes in a car, and hoogte are heights. And so when the ox wagons used to go to and from Stellenbosch, they started farming in Stellenbosch to supply the ships. And going in and out of Stellenbosch, we're the last hill that they would go down into the town. And they named the hill, or there was a little pass that they called Break Heights, and they named the farm after the pass. So that's where the name comes from. So it's a tough one to say, but part of our history, we still have the original title deed from 1812. So the farm was going before that. But we've only got official paperwork from 1812, so just over 200 years. And wines have been grown here. For the first vineyards were planted in South Africa in the 1660s. So we've been growing wine for over 350 years. So as far as New World wine growing countries go, we actually pretty old. But yeah, not known for it. I think, you know, when wine kind of got globalized and stuff started going overseas, and that we were still in apartheid and obviously very isolated. And I think that set our industry back massively. And then obviously having emerged from that, I think the industry has kind of come forward really quickly in a very short space of time. So we've got to do a lot of these kind of things to get you guys to taste wines. But so the farm, we're passionate about being an estate. So from vineyard to bottle, we do on the property. My dad made the first wines here. So grapes have been grown here since the beginning. The first wines were only made in 1995. And my dad made those. He basically did all the farming, winemaking, very small volumes. He used to sell most of the fruit. So what a lot of South Africa did is the apartheid government sort of ran all the production. So we had these big sellers called cooperative sellers. So the farmers would grow the grapes, sell the fruit to these sellers, and then they would make the wine and sell it and stuff. And then it was only in the sort of mid 80s that independent sellers really started proliferating. So there were more and more of them. And so we began in 1995. Then I studied, I was still a youngster then. I studied winemaking at Stellenbosch University, which is the only university in Africa where you can get a degree in winemaking. So I did that, and then I spent a few years traveling, went and worked in Western Australia in Margaret River. I worked in Bordeaux, in Pomerol and Fronsac, so 2 areas there. And then I worked in the Napa Valley. So I spent a couple of years traveling and learning, and then came back full time in 2007 and took over the winemaking and the farming. So I'm all production. My brother is marketing and sales, and then we're trying to get my dad to retire. But I don't think you ever really retire on a farm. But so that's a bit of the sort of the family history, where we come from. And again, like I said, I think one thing we are passionate about is being an estate. So just to have full control of the entire process, from vineyard to bottle, doing everything ourselves. And I really believe, I think something I learned from my dad, and wherever I worked in the world, is the greatest wines are really come from the vineyards. They're not made in the cellar. If you get good grapes, the cellar is really just the finishing off process. And I think that's that's kind of the philosophy we follow now. So put a lot of work in the vineyards to try and get the fruit perfect, or as perfect as it can be, bring it into the cellar. And then I've got a really minimalist approach in the cellar. So I don't add yeast. I do find our Chenin, the first light Chenin, which we're not tasting tonight, but the Honeybunch, which is our reserve, is unfined, and basically like all the reds. So the idea is, nothing added, nothing taken away. What we get from the vineyard is what we want you to taste in the bottle. So should I start talking about the Honeybunch? Are there questions? I think you're on mute, Kira.
Yeah. As I convince everyone else how to do this, I'm the one messing up. So I'd love to know first, before we get into the actual wines, what made you decide to follow in your father's footsteps? We often hear that, the next generation decides to go a different path, and it's usually like it skips a generation. What made you decide that you did want to follow in your father's footsteps?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. I mean, when I finished school, I was actually signed up at the University of Cape Town to go and do business science, which is a Bachelor of Commerce degree. So I actually wasn't, I think I eventually would have come back, but I wasn't signed up to go into wine or study wine or anything like that. And then I finished school and I went and worked with a friend in Holland in the flower auction houses, and it was just for a kind of a 4-month stint. And while I was there, I actually changed my mind. Luckily, my dad knew someone at the department, and I wanted to, I think I wanted to do basically go into a BSc, which is quite general. So, but I wanted to go more in that direction. And then I sort of decided in my first year that I wanted to specialize in wine. But the wine industry is funny. It's once you kind of been in it, it kind of sucks you in. You can't. Same with my brother coming back, and I think once you're in it and you love it, it's very difficult to do anything else. So I mean, we were never pressured. I think that's one thing my dad was very clear on, is that we really didn't have to come back to the farm. If we didn't want to, we didn't have to come back. So my brother he did a commerce degree and worked off the farm or for another company for quite a few years. He came back in 2012. And then my sister, who's 9 years younger than me, much younger, she's doing all our social media. She's doing other stuff as well, but she's sort of slowly getting involved as well. So it's a real one sort of family affair, which I think has its challenges. I think we have, big family fights, but then we've got lots of wine to make up. And so I think that's pretty much how I came back. We were never forced, but I think wine was just kind of in my blood. I grew up helping my dad in the cellar and working in the vineyards. And the vineyard side is what I really love, just being outside. And I find that really rewarding. So I think that's why I went in that direction.
Awesome. I love that. The wine helps like solve the fights, but it also can help start them, depending on what part of the night the drinking starts. So
Yeah,
brilliant. And your dad had it right. If he wanted you to stay in the wine business, the best way to do that was to pressure you to get out of the wine business.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
I love that story. And then one last question before we get into the tasting notes. I'm just curious, your own story. Did you grow up only drinking South African wines, or did your dad expose you to, did you have access to a lot of other wines from around the world to help develop your palate?
Yeah, so I think one of the challenges here was, especially in the 90s, it's changed a lot now, but it was very difficult to get international wines here. When my dad traveled to go and see guys that sold our wine, and that he would always bring wines back. But in the late 90s, we sold grapes to Rupert and Rothschild. So the Rothschilds have got a share in a property just down the road from us, and they've got farms in Argentina and obviously in Bordeaux. And so we used to get quite a bit of those wines. And my dad always says that the right bank of Bordeaux is what made him fall in love with wine. So that's obviously been a big focus for us. We drank a lot of right bank when it was actually, I think he bought quite a lot when it was still affordable. But yeah, so we didn't taste nearly as much as we taste now. With all the Italian, we didn't get much Italian, all the sort of Portuguese and Spanish. So we didn't get a lot of old world, and then we got very little new world. So I didn't grow up drinking international wines. I think it was more South African wines, and obviously traveling and nowadays it's just so important to taste international wines, but we've got access to it now. Not as much access as you guys have. I mean, it's always amazing coming over there and seeing the spread of wines you guys get. But yeah, I grew up predominantly drinking South African wines.
That's such a unique story. I also, my first aha moment in wine was the Right Bank Bordeaux. It was
Cool.
It was a Saint-Emilion, and it was a satellite operation from one of the top producers. And I tasted that 1 ounce cup in a 1 ounce little plastic tasting cup, and all of a sudden my mind was just blown. I didn't know wine could change your life, and that did into the course of, that was 12, 13 years ago, and I'm still on. As my friend Tony, who is here today, he has a wine tasting group called the Slippery Slope, and it's just what you said, is once you're on it, man, it is so hard to stop going on this passion route of your love affair with wine. So we're glad you didn't stop. We're glad you kept going. So
cool, thanks.
Will you tell us about the Honeybunch and how it's different from First Light? Some people here who have been buying your First Light have never tasted your Honeybunch, and I know the story about the difference, but I thought it'd be fun for you to tell us how these two wines are made differently.
Cool. So this vineyard, I was up there this afternoon just tasting through, because we're quite close to harvesting. We're a little bit later than normal this year because we had quite a cold winter and quite late cold into the summer. But it's the oldest vineyard on the farm. So it was planted in 1986. So it's not ancient, but it's old enough to really be nicely in balance. It's a very low trellis. So on the farm, all our vineyards are trellised, except for our Pinotage, which is bush vines. But the Honeybunch is an old trellis. So they didn't take it that far off the ground. They would make the arms, and they've only got one wire to kind of tuck the canopy in. So the vineyard looks quite messy. It hangs open. And because of the road direction, in Stellenbosch, our prevailing summer wind is called the southeaster. And it obviously comes out the southeast off the sea, which is really, we've got very cold sea around us. And it pushes the whole canopy, because the rows face basically east-west, it pushes the whole canopy over the back. So it exposes the kind of the morning sun side of the bunches. And so because it's an old vineyard, you get what we call, every year when you prune, you kind of get these, we call them candles, but the vine, instead of everything being nicely in a line and looking all neat, it gets these weird arms, and it looks really cool, but it's a little bit more messy and all over the place. And my dad never made Chenin Blanc. I started working with the vineyard when I came back in 2007. He used to sell the grapes, and I just tasting through the vineyard, I always found that the bunches that are more exposed would ripen a little bit earlier, and they've got a completely different flavor profile. So the ones that hang kind of a little bit more outside the canopy, they tend to turn gold. They develop these in the grapes themselves. They get these really nice kind of ripe, rich flavors. Whereas the bunches that are more shaded and that hang inside the canopy stay green. They maintain a little bit more acidity, and it's sort of chalk and cheese. They're completely different. So I used to, in 2007, my first year working with the vineyard, I picked it in 2 stages. So I told the team to first pick everything that was more exposed, so everything that was kind of golden and hanging outside the canopy. And then we fermented that separately, and then we went through afterwards and picked all the inside bunches, which are obviously more greener. And from 2007 to 2009, I would ferment those components separately, I'd blend them back together, and we made one Chenin. And then in 2010, I was tasting with, it's a winemaker. He was across the road from us at a farm called La Vineyard, but Francois Nordier. So I think he's in his 80s now, but I mean, he was much older when I was tasting with him. But Chenin and Pinotage were kind of his things. He had a lot of experience. So I always, after harvest, used to get him to come and taste through all the batches and just get his input. And we were tasting these barrel, because I fermented the Honeybunch, or that exposed components, in barrel. And while we were tasting it, he said, "You can't blend this away. You've got to bottle this on its own." And so 2010 is where the Honeybunch began. And it's basically just that exposed component. We pick it early in the morning. It takes a little bit longer. We pick it over a few days because it's a selective pick. So it's not just picking everything that's hanging. They have to kind of look at the bunches, decide it sort of meets the requirements or what we're looking for, pick them, and then we bring them down to the cellar. And I basically put it into the press. I leave it on the skins in the press for about 12 hours. So we put it into the press. We usually have the press filled at about 8 in the morning. I'll put a little bit of dry ice on and then close the press and leave it and come in after dinner. So I'll press it in the evening. And then, very rough settling. From there it goes. I don't add any sulfur or enzymes because we do all spontaneous fermentation. By adding sulfur at the beginning, you kind of kill off all the indigenous yeasts. And then, straight to French oak barrels. We use probably only, it depends on the year, but between 20 and 30% new, and then the rest, second, third, fourth, and fifth fill. So we use quite a big percentage of it is neutral oak, with the idea that we don't want the oak to kind of dominate the wine. And then, 10 to 12 months in barrel, again, depending on the year, and then take it out and bottle it. I always say I think it's the easiest wine that I make, because we literally press it, put it into barrel, and then forget about it for a year. But it's just that sort of component has just given us such unique kind of textured wines. And then 2020, which we bottled last week, is the 10th vintage of Honeybunch. So we'll be making the 11th one coming up. And then the first light, which some of you have tried, is then the inside bunches. So our second pick. So it's usually about a week after we've picked the Honeybunch or those exposed bunches. We'll go through, pick everything that's left. And it's all the bunches that are kind of shaded and stay greener. So I'll bring those in, I press them straight away, go to stainless steel, and then spontaneous ferment in stainless steel, and it's unoaked. So the idea is to keep that component fresher and lighter, and just it's slightly more, I don't know, they're just completely different wines, but just a slightly more acidic, slightly greener, and a just different style of white. And that's also under Stelvin, where the Honeybunch is under cork. So those are the two wines. So shout if there's questions.
I think I had it backwards then. I thought first light was the bunches, the grapes picked that got the first light. And so you picked those first, and then the ones left hanging on the vines later turned into Honeybunch. So this is actually the opposite of what I thought of these. So I'm so sorry.
Yeah, so the first light comes from the slope of the vineyard is it faces southeast. So it gets the sort of the sun in the morning. And then in the afternoon, because of the slope, the sun kind of goes behind the slope, so it doesn't get baked. So it's more, the direction of the slope. But the Honeybunch, because they're more exposed, they ripen a little bit earlier. But so that's the two ones.
Okay, and if I understand correctly from the first time I fell in love with your Honeybunch, which was, we met, by the way, at Press Wine Bar. I
Yes.
At both restaurants. So I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah. Yes, I do. Yeah.
We carried, I think, all 4 of these wines that we're tasting tonight, and I love them so much, and I'm so excited to taste the new vintages. But I first fell in love with the Honeybunch, and if I remember correctly, all those years ago, there is a little bit of botrytis or noble rot that sometimes affects these. Can you talk about what that is and how that's related to your climate? Because you must have a little bit more of a humid climate if you're getting some of that botrytis. So can you tell us about your climate specifically?
Yes. So the we get well, first of all, no botrytis or noble rot. I'm sure most of you guys know what it is, but it's basically a fungus that grows on the grapes. It dehydrates the grapes, so it doesn't kind of rot them. It looks like a fungus, but it just basically dehydrates them. So it removes moisture, so it kind of has a concentrating effect. It also definitely gives a little bit of flavor as well, but they actually taste good. So you generally get 2 types of rot that we see. You get sour rot is when the grapes actually burst, and that's unpleasant. It's a volatile. You get volatile acidity, and when you taste those grapes, they don't taste good. Whereas botrytized grapes really taste delicious. I mean, they look terrible, but they taste delicious. And with the Honeybunch, because we get a lot of dew in the evenings because are we close to the sea, and just where the vineyard is situated, there's a lot of dew in the evening, so the bunches do get quite damp. Not every evening, but generally when it's wind still, we'll get dew, and that moisture kind of sort of stimulates this noble rot. So because the Honeybunches the Honeybunch bunches are more exposed, that rot that happens tends to stay healthy. There's a lot of airflow, so it doesn't kind of turn into sour rot or anything off. It stays healthy and stays really nice noble rot. So we're able to use it in the wine. Whereas the inside bunches, which are the greener bunches, the berries are also generally a little bit bigger. That often turns sour. So if there's any bunches with rot on them for the first light pick, I tell the team just to drop them on the ground. So we don't use them at all. Where the Honeybunch, we're able to use these botrytized bunches. So it's usually, it depends on the year. We went through a couple of dry years. 2019 was the first year where we actually had a decent winter rain in 2018. And it was a good year for botrytis, basically. I mean, we got about 12% in total, where the 3 years prior, we were sitting between 5 and 8%. So it's not a huge component, but it's enough to really bring a little bit more texture. I think a lot of the Honeybunch really there's almost like that honeyed character that, especially when it ages, that kind of develops. I think a lot of that is down to the botrytized component in the wine. But I think I know guys around us have tried to, inoculate with botrytis, and it's something that you can't control at all. So if it's there, we're happy and lucky. But if it's not, you can't add it. So I think it's a really special component to use in this wine, and I think it makes it a little bit more unique.
I love that. It's kind of like cheese. There's the good mold and there's the bad mold, and And there's a very stark difference between those. By the way, we picked out cheeses to go with all your different wines, and I picked out a Loire Valley goat cheese that was like aged for 6 months. So it was like semi-hard on the outside, super gooey on the inside. But 2 questions before we move on from this. What would you pair with this wine, and what do you think the aging potential of this wine is? Have you had back vintages of it? How long does this wine last?
So, well, as far as aging potential, I think, so we've got the 2010s are still drinking really well. So that's as far back as I go. Unfortunately, I think I wish my dad had made it, but he just said he only made red wines. But I think, the acidity is not particularly high on it. It does have a nice low pH though. So it's, and then it's got a lot of kind of, there's a really nice, there's a lot of texture and kind of spice to the wine. So I think as far as ageability goes, it depends on the vintage, but I think the 19 is just really improving. I think, it'll go 10 years easily, but again, it depends how with pairing, we often pair it with kind of Thai dishes, so sweet and sour. Like I love it with like langoustines with a sweet and sour sauce. We do it on the braai or just on the barbecue. It can really stand up to those. But I find as it ages, I like it with then I really like it with cheeses. I think I think a goat's cheese is perfect. Some of those, a goat's cheese or a blue cheese, something that's quite rich and flavorful, because of the style of wine. I think it can kind of stand up to quite bold flavors. So I think I don't like saying to people you must age it for 10 years. It drinks really well now, but if you just buy a couple of extra bottles and put those away, because I've for all my kids' birth years, I've kept a couple of magnums and 3 liters aside of Honeybunch. So we'll drink it when they're a little older.
That's awesome. By the way, all of these wines are available by the case. That way you can drink 6 now and hold 6, or drink a case now and hold a case for later. So while we transition, we're doing the Vantage Pinatage next. And we've got the 2018 here in Virginia. So while people pour that, I want to save more time at the end to talk about your 2 Bordeaux blends, because those are, man, they're stunning wines. So will you give us an introduction of what Pinotage is, how it came to be in South Africa, and why does yours taste so much better than like 99% of every Pinotage I've ever had? So please tell us.
So Pinotage is the South African grape. It was crossed at Stellenbosch University, so where I studied, just down the road from us, in the 1920s, and it's a crossing between Pinot Noir and Cinsault, which in South Africa at the turn of the last century they called Cinsault Hermitage, because a lot of it came from Hermitage, and that's where the Pinotage comes from. It was a flower crossing, so it's cross-pollinated a Pinotage, a Pinot Noir and a Cinsault flower, and Pinotage is what resulted. The first sort of commercial, or the first bottled or estate or I don't know, cellar bottled Pinotages were only really in the late 1940s into the 1950s. So it's a very young varietal as far as varietals in the wine world go, and it's a very early ripener. So it's one of the first grapes we pick. So like this year, I think we're going to start with Pinotage and not Chenin or any of the whites. And I think for that reason, it's a challenging grape to work with, because it doesn't have a lot of time to ripen. You often end up with Pinotages that have unripe fruit. If you try and farm it for yield or for volume, you end up with a lot of unripe fruit, and that gives you these kind of green, the sort of smoky, burnt rubber characters that a lot of Pinotages can have. So that flavor generally comes from the vineyard. And we've got 2 hectares of Pinotage, so it's I think about 4 acres. So it's not a huge area, but a nice size, about the same size area that we have. That is about the same size vineyard as the Honeybunch vineyard, and it's all planted to bush vines. So where the rest of the farm, everything's generally trellised, the bush vines, it's literally just we take the cutting, stick it in the ground, and it just grows. So it's I love bush vines, and the only thing is they're just backbreaking to work with. But the theory behind planting Pinotage as bush vines is that you get, because the vine and the bunches, everything's closer to the soil. You don't have airflow where if a vine's trellised, you've got a lot of airflow under the vines at night, so the bunches actually cool down, so you get a bigger bigger temperature variation between day and night. Whereas a bush vine, it's close to the ground. It's kind of the shoots hang over the bunches, and the ground warms up in the day, keeps them warm at night. So it almost accelerates the ripening process a little bit. And another thing with bush vines is they also naturally limit the yield. So where trellised vines, you basically trellis them up, you fill the wire, so you've got a cordon, that you can fill with bunches and shoots. The bush vines, you've got very little control over that. So we kind of prune it to have so many spurs or shoots, but you never really know. So we generally get much lower yields, and that also aids in the ripening process. So the vines don't have to ripen as much fruit, so they generally ripen the fruit that is there much better. And I think that's definitely that. And then also this vineyard, we call it our Vantage Vineyard. So it's we often go up there, and it sort of overlooks Stellenbosch. So the vineyard kind of faces south. It's a nice cool site where traditionally Pinotage was planted in very warm sites because they thought that would help the ripening, but it actually just kind of speeds up the ripening, and then it cooks the fruit, whereas a cool site allows a little bit more time to ripen. It's the vineyard just gives us beautiful fruit. I mean, again, this one, I think we pick it early in the morning. I bring it into the cellar. We just do a bunch sorting, so we don't do a berry sorting like we do on the wines we're going to taste following this, because I don't mind if we get some stems and some other stuff into the tank. And then natural fermentation usually lasts spontaneous fermentation between 10 days and 2 weeks. And then I drain it. It finishes malolactic fermentation in barrel. And then it has 18 months in French oak and about 30% new. So again, with this one, I think we were trying to make it in a more delicate or slightly lighter style. It's definitely not it's not Pinot Noir light, but it's lighter if you taste other Pinotages. And I think I try and make it with the parents in mind. So, Pinot Noir and Cinsault, a really nice, juicy red. And then Pinot Noir, you get that kind of that earthiness and a little bit of meatiness and kind of funk. And I think I hope that the parents kind of show through in the wine. And then, take it out of barrel and bottle it. And then, and that's the Vantage Pinatage.
I love it. I've had like maybe 5 Pinotage in my entire life where I was like, oh my gosh, I want more of this. Okay, that was an interesting wine. And yours has always been one every single vintage. So I appreciate that. And we talk a lot about in my classes the diurnal temperature variation and how important that is to lengthen the ripening process. So that's so interesting. I've never heard a winemaker say that they don't want that they want to actually accelerate the ripening process, which makes sense if it's like Tempranillo. If it's going to ripen early, you want the fruit to ripen at the right time so that the tannins are optimal and the phenolics are optimal and nothing's off balance. So that makes sense, and everything you're doing is obviously right because it's not like burnt tires, and it is really, really lovely. I've had so many people say that all South African wines should taste like burnt tires because of their unique terroir, and I'm like, no, that's just really bad like crop management. But so
that's not so it's. Well, I don't know. Maybe there are some winemakers that look for burnt rubber, but it's definitely not a pleasant aroma. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts in the chat room. If this is your first Pinotage, what you thought. Obviously, Pinot Noir and Cinsault, instead of like cultivated just in the vineyards, this grape didn't just develop over centuries in the vineyards. This was crossbred in a laboratory in the last century. So really exciting to try this kind of new style of wine. So and just so you know, this is not what every Pinotage tastes like. This is just what really good Pinotage tastes like. So you have been spoiled for Pinotage forever now.
Yeah, and I think a little bit, you know, so in terms of pairing with Pinotage, we often pair it with lamb or venison, so slightly more aromatic meats, and then you know with that kind of the funk and the slight greenness, it just works well with slightly spicier dishes as well. So obviously, being on the spice route, South Africa, there's quite a big Thai and curries and sort of Indian influence in our cooking. So we do what we call potjies, which are kind of stews on the fire that you cook for 5 or 6 hours, and with curry spices and that in, and it works very well with that because it's got a nice fruit, and it's not an overbearing tannin, it kind of a slightly more gentle tannin, so it sort of tones down the heat, and it just kind of works well. So yeah,
we don't have the braai here, but we definitely have a lot of barbecues here, and I could totally see this being paired with like typical Virginia, like pig roast.
Yeah,
would be amazing. All the Virginia barbecue sauces and all the fixins, all the sides. So if you ever come back to Virginia post-COVID, then
yes,
throw a pig roast and drink your wine around a Virginia braai. We'll call it.
Cool.
Yeah. Well, because I want to spend the most time on the next two wines, if y'all have two glasses, I'd be really curious if you wanted to taste the next two wines side by side. If not, and if you didn't open up all of them, totally fine. We're going to talk about them one at a time, but I think it will help you appreciate the wines most if you can taste them side by side. Because in my mind, we're basically tasting a Saint-Emilion next to a Pauillac. And I think they're both so fabulous. And I've been using a Coravin because I had to write my notes on this right when the wines first came in. And like all week long at the end of every night, I pour myself just a little bit more out of the Coravin, but I had to save enough for this class. So I couldn't resist though continuing to go back to these wines. So let's go ahead and pour the Sir Thomas Cullinan. And if you could give us a little history about, of course, Sir Thomas and how he got his Sir, that'd be great.
Okay, cool. So the name of our sort of signature red, the Sir Thomas Cullinan, it's named after my great grandfather, and he came over with his parents in about 1850 from Ireland, and his dad started my great grandfather, he started a transport business, and it was actually based out of the Cape and going up the coast with ox wagons, sort of transporting goods. And he passed away when the family was quite young, and they ended up moving to Johannesburg. So that's where my family's originally from. So Johannesburg's kind of a landlocked area. It's kind of a business hub. It started with gold, and it was part of the gold rush and that. And he had a passion for geology, and obviously following the gold and the diamond rushes and things like that. He actually got everywhere too late, and he used to ride out on his horse on weekends and look for semi-precious stones and kind of polish them up. We've still got quite a few today. And while doing that, he found a volcanic chute, which is now it's probably 40 minutes drive outside of Johannesburg. But, then it was probably like a full day's horse ride. But it's a volcanic chute where he thought he might find diamonds. And he tried to buy the farm, or this portion of the farm, from the guy who owned it, and the guy said no, he doesn't want to sell. And then that farmer passed away, and he actually ended up buying the portion from his son, and he started mining it. And in 1903 he found the it was at the time, it was the biggest uncut or the biggest rough diamond that had ever been found. I think there are bigger rough diamonds have been found subsequently, but it's still the most valuable diamond in terms of clarity and color that's ever been found. But South Africa was in the process of gaining our independence, so from the United Kingdom, and we, as part of a parting gift, he gave the diamond to the British royal family. So it was obviously, I think he was kind of pressured into doing that by the Transvaal government at the time because it was such a unique find. But it was like a thank you for giving us our independence. And they then cut it into 2 stones. So it's now the main diamond. It was 3,000 carats, the original, the uncut, the rough diamond. And then it's now the main diamond in the scepter of the crown jewels, which is called the Greater Star of Africa. And it's the main diamond in the crown of the crown jewels, which is the Lesser Star of Africa. And he got knighted for giving the diamond away. The knighthood isn't hereditary, so me and my brother aren't sirs. So I think he should have kept the diamond, or sort of sold it for some good money. But anyway, it's a bit of our family history. So we gave his name to the wine, and it's just sort of part of the story. So and then the wine, so any questions on that?
Y'all would have literally had the most badass winery in the entire world had you kept that diamond.
I know.
But hindsight, 20.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, not even hindsight. I mean, I don't know. But I think, at the time, the government at the time kind of controlled all prices, and anything that was found, they determined what was paid for it. So, I think he was kind of pressured into giving it away. But anyway, it's sad. I mean, I've been to the Tower of London, and like walking around, I told the guard that was watching the counters, my great-great-grandfather found that, and he just told me to keep moving. There's absolutely there's no link anymore. So, but cool. Should I talk a little bit about the wine? Oh, you're on mute, Kira.
Sorry. We were having some problems with some other people being unmuted and popping into view. So if you could make sure that you are staying on mute, that would be super helpful for us. But yes, let's talk about this wine. Let's talk about your inspiration of this beautiful ripe bank Bordeaux blend from South Africa.
Cool. So like I mentioned earlier, my dad, he said what his aha moment with wine, same as yours, Kira, was also a right bank and a Pomerol. And so that's kind of been, a focus for us since we started. And I think, Merlot is specifically Merlot or Merlot-driven blends. And the sites, the vineyards that we use in this wine are the highest, or actually in the next 2 wines we're tasting, are the highest vineyards on the property. So they had about 350 meters, which I think it's like just over 1,000 feet. So it's not extremely high, but we very, because of the proximity to the sea, it's starting like Stellenbosch, the town itself is at about 150 feet, and we are very close to Stellenbosch. So it's a very quick climb, and the slopes are quite steep. So the top rows of those top vineyards are actually terraced. So they're stepped. And because of that, they dry out a lot quicker, and they're just way more exposed. And that, those couple of rows is what we use to make these 2 wines. So there's the Sir Thomas Cullinan and then the Cab, which we're going to taste next. I think, I always like to say, it's definitely right bank inspired. I worked as soon as I finished, my dad sent me to work there because he loves their wines. I mean, I love their wines. So it's right bank inspired, but it's definitely South African. I think, we want you to be able to taste that it's South African. And it's just from such a unique sort of little specific site on the farm. It's the highest, it's got the best view. If we go for sundowners, we always go up to these rows of vineyards. So we can see Table Mountain and Table Bay from the vineyards as well. And yeah, because of the terraces, you know, the soil's exposed on the one side, so it dries out, and basically the vines just struggle a lot more. And because they struggle, we get sort of smaller berries, smaller bunches, and just more concentration. And then also because of where they are, they're a lot more exposed to the wind, and the wind during flowering means that we get much looser bunches. So we have less berries or flowers that actually set and turn into berries. So instead of having very compact bunches, we have quite loose bunches. And that means that there's sort of space around the berries, so you get light into the bunches themselves, and it just gives you much better all-round ripeness. And so it's a very unique area on the farm. So we basically pick those rows. I ferment them all in 500-liter open-top barrels, so big open-top barrels. And so it's small format ferments because we're getting very little fruit off those rows. And then you know, manual punch downs. So just, you know, we punch it down. Depends on the sort of stage of fermentation, but we started about 3 times a day, and then down to just 1 punch down a day near the end. And then we go to the Sir Thomas Cullinan is 80% new oak, also all French oak, and for 2 years, so 24 months. So it has a long time in barrel, a lot more new oak. Because it's more concentrated, we feel it can handle more new oak. I'm still working with the same coopers or barrel makers that my dad began with. So, you know, we kind of know what barrels work, what oak from what region of France, seasoning. And I think our goal now with the oak is really, we wanted to bring texture and just kind of round the tannins a little bit, but we don't want sort of those smoky oak kind of chocolate flavors, you know, that you can get from oak. So I think I use nothing higher than a medium toasting. So I use between light and medium toast barrels, just so that the barrels don't overpower the wine. And then, yeah, take it out and bottle it. And that's the Sir Thomas Cullinan. I think you guys are having the 16, eh?
Yes, we are having the 16. And I have to say, I mean, I love the Sir Thomas Cullinan when I first started buying it to get 14. But man, this knocks every other vintage that I've had on the carts. This is by far, I think, my favorite wine that you've ever made. So thank you.
Oh, thanks, Kira. Thanks so much.
There was some questions about oak barrels. So I know so this is a perfect segue. You talked about only using French oak and using the same cooper that even your dad made. So by the way, everyone, a cooper is someone who makes the barrels and toasts the inside. And the inside, how much they toast it, kind of affects the flavor that the oak gives to the wine. So not only how many times the barrel has been used, but how it has been toasted will affect the flavor that the oak gives to the wine. I love that oak is not overpowering the wine. It's like the wine that speaks. The oak is like the salt and pepper, just kind of highlighting the flavors of the wine. Can you tell us what the other traditions are in the Stellenbosch wine community? Is everyone using American oak, French oak, Hungarian? Is there a lot of diversity, or is it very kind of singularly French oak?
No, yeah. So I mean, I think oak, you know, with wine and making wine, there's so many variables, and I think that's farming. You know, you're working with kind of climate, and you're just working with stuff you can't control. And oak is another. It's actually another variable because it's a natural product. So it's it's from trees. They're all different. They can be from different areas. They can be seasoned differently. So basically, what the coopers do is we only use French oak, just because we find it's more consistent. It generally gives a slightly sort of it's very respectful of the fruit, so it doesn't tend to dominate wines too much. It doesn't bring a lot of sweetness. So American oak is a little bit more known for bringing kind of vanilla flavors and slightly sweeter flavors. And then Hungarian oak is almost a mix between the two, but it's not as regulated. So you get a little bit more inconsistency. And, you know, that's, if you're working with barrels that, you know, and again, like the Sir Thomas Cullinan, we don't make much of it. So, you know, I can't afford to have a barrel that I don't like. You know, they all need to work. So basically, the Cooper we work with, he goes and sources, you know, trees from the Tranche, so it's a kind of center of France, and they season it for. We do 36-month seasons. So basically, what happens is they'll all the Coopers, they'll go and they'll select the oak, they split it into kind of big planks, and then they leave it outside. So you can have sort of 24 months is generally, so 2 years is generally the least amount of time that they will season oak for outside. And that's just in the rain and, you know, basically leaching out kind of the green tannin, and the oak kind of just ripens outside. And you can do 24, 36, up to, I mean, even longer. Generally not too much longer than 36 because it tends to leach too much tannin out of the oak. But once it's been seasoned, they bring it in, and the cooperages, I mean, Coopers and making barrels is just a whole nother art. It's amazing to see. I mean, those guys, it's obviously been fine-tuned, or you know, some of it's been mechanized now because they can, you know, electronically cut the staves so that they all fit together. But it's still these guys with these massive arms and big hammers just hammering these hoops onto barrels. And so they basically do that. Then they toast the barrels. And toasting is, the idea is that they char the inside, or the kind of the first half a centimeter, which would be like a quarter of an inch, I think, of oak, and that breaks. It opens the pores, basically breaks the cells of that area of the oak, and allows the oak to release tannin into the wine, and some of the few other things, but predominantly tannin and wood tannin. And when they do that toasting, depending on the heat and the length of the toasting, it's actually more heat, because you can have a heavy toast. It's just a high heat for a short amount of time. But if you have a heavy toast, it really goes like dark and it's very charred. And a lot of that gives more of that kind of charred, smoky, almost coffee and chocolate flavors into the wine, where lighter toastings tend to just release more of the oak tannin without giving too much flavor to the wine. So that's a whole nother art in itself. And I think by working with the same Cooper for so long, or Coopers, we work with 3, you sort of, they know what we want, we know what oak, we know what seasoning, and it's kind of eliminating just another variable, you know, trying to be more consistent. Put it into the barrels. But even with that, you know, we taste through the barrels, you get barrel variation. Same Cooper, just a different barrel from the same year, and it'll taste different. But basically what happens in the barrels is when we've just finished making the wine, so we've punched down a lot, we've extracted a lot of tannin. The wine tastes really dry, it's really intense, and then you put it into barrel, and the wine, we say it breathes. So barrels allow small amounts of oxygen through the wood because it's porous, and there's basically a reaction that happens between the tannins, that in the presence of small amounts of oxygen, they form nice long chains. So they begin as short chains, and when a tannin in the short chain form, it tastes really dry. And then as they lengthen in the presence of little bits of oxygen in barrel, they taste rounder and softer. And so that's why we leave it in barrel as well. I feel like I'm waffling again. So
no, it's marvelous. I taught a class last, it was a while ago because it was pre-COVID. It was all about older wines and basically what chemically is happening to these tannins, these long chain polymers that make them so much softer. And it's so fascinating, the chemistry of how wines age and how the tannins soften. When did you start making both the Sir Thomas Cullinan and the Reserve Cab? Like, how far back do your library vintages go? Can you talk to us about the aging potential of these 2 wines? Because we know Bordeaux can age for decades. How about these wines? Because I want to age them for decades.
So my dad, he began on the farm with making Cab Sauv and Merlot, and he always used to put 15% cab into his Merlot, because we're allowed to add 15% and still call it a varietal. I don't do that now because I believe that, 15% is a big percentage. It's then a blend, and that's where in 2010 we changed the name from the Merlot to the Sir Thomas Cullinan. So I also had the freedom then to add more cab. But the Sir Thomases I make now are really inspired by the wines my dad made in the 90s, and we are still drinking those now. So the 95 and 98s are still drinking beautifully. We don't open them often now because we don't have a lot left, but we'll open them at our year end, any kind of functions we do, and then any family celebration. But they're still drinking amazing, So and that's going on 30 years now. So the ageability is definitely there. I think because of where the vineyards are, we get a nice acidity. There's good tannin and sort of good structure, and then I think enough fruit, because I think fruit's really important for it to age well. You don't want it to age and loses all its fruit and just becomes weird. So they should age well. But again, if you age them, if we're drinking those wines from sort of 90s and early 2000s, we'll have them completely on their own. We don't pair them with anything. Whereas now, if I'm drinking the 2016, have it with a nice sort of hearty dish or good cheese, just something to kind of counter the tannins. It drinks beautifully. So they'll age.
Awesome. That's always great to hear. For those of you who are tasting these side by side, I'd love your notes in the chat room about the differences between them, maybe the similarities too. Will you talk to us now about your reserve cab? So the reserve cab we're drinking is the 2017. Was there any big difference between the two vintages? And do you find that Stellenbosch as a wine region has lots of variability in between vintages, or are you pretty much almost like, kind of stable, just always going warmer because of global warming? But how do the vintages vary? Are they drastic variations, or are they pretty stable?
Yeah, so I think Stellenbosch, one of the things, Stellenbosch is a big area. It's a lot of vineyards. I'm just trying to think. I'll Google just now, just quickly, how many hectares it is, but it's very diverse. So, we've got, it sort of kind of starts on the Helderberg mountain, which we look across at, which is north facing. Then it goes round to kind of the Stellenbosch mountain and then onto the Simonsberg. We're part of the Simonsberg ward. So we're on the Simonsberg mountain, which is generally more south facing. So it faces the sea. We get more wind off the sea. So our wines tend to be a little bit more sort of classically styled. But again, in terms of vintage variation, I think one of the things about being an estate and being quite small is you can definitely get vintage variation, so you can taste the difference between years. So 16 was a little bit cooler, where 17 was a little bit warmer. So 16, I think, definitely a little bit more elegant, where 17 was kind of a bit more bold and a bit more intense. So we do get vintage variation, but we're not as much as as you'll get in Bordeaux or Burgundy, where they get hail or frost. We don't have any of that risk. I think because of our proximity to the sea and the winds that we get off the sea, it kind of moderates the temperature a little bit, so we don't get extreme hots and we don't get really extremely cold. So I think that helps with consistency. Whereas if you go a little bit more inland and a little bit more continental, they definitely have a bigger variation in vintages. But so we're not hugely affected by that. But Stellenbosch, one of the things with Stellenbosch is just because it's so, we're so mountainous and hilly that just on our property we've got 30 hectares of vineyards. So that's I think like 90 or 100 acres of vines, and we've got vineyards that face every aspect, so north, south, east, and west. So we've got which is very, not normal. And then we've got about 8 different soil types, you know, across the farm slopes. So starting at the top where they're a little bit shallower and sort of less decomposed, moving down to the bottom where it's a little bit more sandy. So, you know, there's incredible diversity in a very small area. And I think, you know, that also helps, you know, if we have a very dry year, you know, the lower vineyards will kind of counter it. But for the Sir Thomas Cullinan cab that we're tasting, you know, that's from one specific site. So you might taste more of a vintage variation in those.
I love it. And someone looked this up. Thank you, Tawana, so much. So 37,000 acres, which is 14,973 hectares. So that's how big the Stellenbosch region specifically is. So thank you so much for looking that up. I appreciate that.
Thanks, guys.
Can you chat with us? We have just a few more questions. I'm so sorry. I know you're so tired. And
No, I'm relaxed, please. So yeah.
So a couple of questions that I haven't gotten to yet from the chat room. One is about the water crisis. I mean, just a few years ago, you know, Cape Town was on the verge of literally running out of water, and y'all are about 30 kilometers outside of Cape Town. So how are these vineyards? I know there's a huge sustainability movement within the South African wineries to make sure that irrigation isn't being unsustainable. So how do you approach irrigation and water management in these times of deficit?
So we had they were talking about day zero, which was the day that Cape Town, and we part of the greater Cape Town area, so it was us too, was going to run out of water completely. So it was a bit of a I don't know, it was a bit of a mind job, you know. I think everybody got a massive wake-up call. People have, I mean, it's crazy how it's changed things. You know, people have changed their gardens, so they're planting indigenous plants that can actually survive drought. You know, people don't have these massive lawns anymore. It's changed the kind of the way, because I mean, so South Africa, or the Western Cape where we are, it's traditionally, it's a Mediterranean climate, you know. So I mean, if you move away from the rivers, you know, it's just kind of scrub, and it's quite rocky and quite dry. So it's not like a lush, you know, sort of area. And so there's never been a lot of water here. And the Cape Town as a city, you know, a lot of people have moved from Johannesburg down to Cape Town. It's just kind of swelled and really grown a lot. I mean, Stellenbosch there used to be a big expanse of it was just kind of like flat, sandy, almost like sea sand between Cape Town and Stellenbosch, between the mountains, and it's now almost completely connected. So there's houses that run from the harbor basically all the way to where Stellenbosch starts, where the farms kind of start. So it's got huge, and you know, there is only so much water. So we went through 3 years of really intense drought, where we had pretty much under about a third of what our annual rainfall for 3 years, what our annual rainfall should be. And that brought us to basically looking out for day zero. So we were limited to, it was 60 liters. So I must also get I really need to work on my liters and gallons, but I think there's three, it's probably like 20 gallons. We were limited to 20 gallons of water per person per day. So, I mean, it was extreme. And that was for flushing toilets, washing clothes, drinking.
Less than 15, actually. So very small amount of water.
Yeah, so it was quite intense. So, I mean, as far as the vineyards go, they kind of they're obviously very low down on the priority list when it comes to allocating water from the government. So we've got 3 dams on the farm, which we can irrigate from. But basically with irrigation, I'm not a huge fan of irrigation. If we don't have to irrigate, I won't irrigate. Young vines, where before the root systems are kind of established, you need to irrigate just to get them kind of through their first 2 summers until they're established. Whereas like the Honeybunch and the Sir Thomas Cullinan vineyard and the Cab vineyard, are they've got, I've got drippers in there. So in the drought years, I was able to sustain them, but I generally don't irrigate. Like this year, they've had nothing, and they won't need to be irrigated. So, I try not to irrigate if we don't need to, but water is definitely something we're conscious of, and it's definitely it's changed since my dad was farming. They would, if they in dry years, and if they would have to irrigate, their first irrigation would always only be in the beginning of Feb. For us, if it's a really dry, like those drought years, it would have to be beginning of December. I mean, it was that dry. The soils just had no moisture. So it's definitely something we think about and have to watch for.
Well, thank you for that very honest answer to a serious question that we don't really deal with very much on the East Coast here. It rains all the freaking time, and
yeah, you guys are lucky.
Yeah, we don't really come to grips with this until we talk to people who are winemakers on the West Coast or winemakers in Washington or South Africa or any of these desert climates. So thank you for making this a more reality in our brains. So your total production, where you're at now, do you have plans on growing your acres to vine? Do you have plans on growing just where you are exporting? Where are you now? And I'll be like a career interviewer. What's your 5-year plan?
So in the wine industry, you've got to have a 30-year plan, because what we're planting now is basically for our kids. So I mean, we're planting some more Chenin this year, and by the time it's giving us sort of Honeybunch quality, I'll be in my mid to late 70s. So it's also quite a mind, because something you got to get your head around, but. No, so in terms of growth, at the moment we do around 150 to 200 tons of fruit a year, and of that we bottle around 100, basically like 150,000 bottles. So between 10 and 10 and sort of 15,000 cases, depending on yields. In the drought years, we went down to about 8,000 cases, so we were almost halved for 3 years, and then now we've gone up a little bit. But I mean, our goal, I don't think our goal is really to expand too much. We want to get consistently, I think 15,000 cases of wine is where we want to get to, and sort of sustain it at that. And I think that's a good size to be family, still really keep it family run, with me making all the wine. I like that size because I know every batch I can still manage the vineyards. If we get bigger than that, we'd need to get someone in to manage the vineyards. If I wanted to focus just on making the wine, or someone to help make the wine, either way. But at the size, if we stay at that size, I think I can still manage with everything. And no plans to expand hugely, but I think to maybe grow our value offering. We're planting some different. We've got a bit of Cab Franc we planted a few years ago, which will eventually in sort of 5 or 6 years, I think, will be in the Sir Thomas Cullinan as well. We're planting some Cinsault, and so a few different varietals that we're trying and sort of playing with. But I mean, you can't play too much. I think that's one of the big sort of chats, chatting about what we're going to plant next year. What we plant next year in 30 years' time needs to still be working. So that's one of the things, you can't follow trends. You've got to plant what you think works best for that slope. And so it'll be making good wine in 5 years' time. And in 25 years' time, it's still going to be making good wine, and you don't know what if people like Merlot went through a huge dip after Sideways, the movie, in 25 years time, maybe a little different. But I hope that answers your question. I really feel like I'm waffling now. I think it's it's a little bit late in the evening.
you are definitely not waffling and staying
Okay.
despite how late it is. So I'll sum all of this up and then we'll let you go. So if you could answer one of these three questions, you can just pick the one. Either something that your dad did in either the growing of the vines or the making of the wine, that you have totally changed course, you know, after the generations, you know, we understand more about how some of these things work. Or something you did at the beginning of your career that you have totally changed course, or something that you wish everyone would change course to. You can pick like one of those three to answer to finish off this night, like just to think about how we should all develop.
I think they kind of all tie in a little bit, all those questions. You know, I studied when we sold. So we sold grapes to Rupert and Rothschild, and the guy that did all of their blending was Michel Rouland, he's quite a well-known wine consultant from Pomerol. He always says he was born under the leaf of a Merlot vine, but he did all of their blending, and in doing the blending, he tasted the batches of wine that they made from our Merlot blocks, and really loved them. And he actually came to come and see the vineyards, and him and my dad got on really well. And then, so he ended up actually buying a share in our cellar. So we made wine with him from 2002 till 2007. When I came back, we actually bought him out because we wanted to bring it back into the family. But I think that was so my dad made wine before that. And we then worked with Michel. I worked for him in Pomerol and Fronsac in Napa, and really learned a lot from him. And I think that was it was in an interesting sort of stage in the wine industry where everyone was kind of trying to go bigger and sort of bolder and more intense, and, you know, more new oak, more extraction. And I think when I started full time on the farm here, you know, we were in that direction. It was picking super ripe, really like working the fruit hard to extract as much as we can, and then just going into a lot of new oak, and generally heavier toasted oak. So it was medium plus toastings up to heavy toastings, and you know, that has changed a lot. I mean, that was in the years I was learning, and then, you know, I just found after, you know, like in 2008, 2009, 2010, when we started bottling all of those wines, when I'd first come back, I thought I just preferred the wines that my dad had made in the 90s, which were all picked a little bit earlier. You know, he didn't do a lot of pump overs and punch downs. He didn't work the fruit as hard, so it was easier to make. And then didn't use as much new oak, so it was just, the wines were a little bit more restrained. They were maybe a little bit more rustic. You know, they had like maybe a slightly dry finish and more spice, maybe a bit of greenness to them, but they were just way more interesting, and they lasted much better. And I think I haven't gone fully back to where my dad was, but I think something I've changed since I started is that, you know, I've kind of toned it down a bit. I think not picking as late, you know, as ripe, trying to respect, or trying to get more of a sense of place in the wines. So I think by picking less ripe, you know, we get more of you get more of an influence of the vineyard in the final wine. And so I think that's something that's definitely changed a lot since I started, and the whole industry has changed in that. And then something I would change now, sure, I'm not sure. I think in general, I think what's cool about the wine industry is that you really can find, you know, people with a lot of different philosophies. I mean, one thing I think it's not something I don't like, but I think something that it's gone in that direction a lot, especially in the new world. I see it here and in Napa as well, in California, but where a lot of focus has gone onto winemakers and less onto vineyards. Or, I mean, I think, you know, I almost think viticulturalists need to be more sort of more praised than winemakers. But you know, wines are, if you go to the old world, you know, I think it's all about site, you know. So I mean, it'll be a specific few rows of a specific vineyard. That's like the Grand Cru, or the, you know, that's what sort of makes the wine. It's nothing to do with the person behind it. And I think that's something that I think if we could put more focus on just vineyards, I think that would do a lot of good for the growers and the farmers, because I think they're really an important cog in the industry, and I think it would help improve wine quality in general.
Oh my gosh, such beautiful, beautiful answers, and very diplomatic answers, I might say. Some people at this late in the evening with wine in their system might be tempted to be very brazen and even name the raiders that are causing this dilemma of highly rated wines that are over extracted. So you were so diplomatic. I won't be so. So thank you so much for both making wines that are authentic to the grapes, to the vineyards, to authentically represent what South Africa has to offer. You're not trying to be Bordeaux. You're just saying that you're Bordeaux inspired. You're not trying to be Loire Valley, Chenin Blanc. You're not trying to be Sauvignon. You're just Loire Valley inspired. And I think your inspiration and your talent is immense. And I really, really appreciate your beautiful wines. I think everybody else has had a great time tonight as well. So thank you a million times over, Chris. I appreciate it.
Oh, thanks, Kira. Thanks so much. I don't think I chatted about the cab though, guys. Do you want me to give a quick run over on the cab?
I'm sorry, we talked so much about all the other questions. I didn't want to hold you up longer, but if you want to give us
it's fine. No, I'm awake. I'm quite enjoying this now. So I'm just sort of getting into the groove now. So it's no, so the cab, the cab is basically, it's the same cab that I use in the Sir Thomas Cullinan. So it's the vineyard right next to the Merlot vineyard, and again also terraced rows. So the same story. The vines struggle, you know, smaller berries, smaller bunches, smaller berries, looser bunches, and just more concentration. And I think the Simonsberg, which is the mountain or the region of Stellenbosch that we're a part of, the mountain that we're on, is, I think it makes really classic, and by classic, I think I mean, you know, sort of more old world inspired cabs. So there is definitely a green line through them, you know, but there's a nice backbone of fruit, I think, which also kind of sort of counters that savory element. But they definitely not New World, you know, not New World style cabs where you've got, you know, the big plush, round, rich tannins. I think they're a little bit more savory, a little bit more austere, but you know, they've still got some New World fruit. And I think this cab shows really nicely, I think, where South Africa kind of fits in the wine world. You know, I think we fit so nicely between New World and Old World. You know, we've got a bit of that nice New World fruit, but then there's that Old World kind of austerity and kind of savoriness to the wines, which I think, and I just think it's a great balance. But yeah, that's the Cab Sav. Made also 500-liter open top barrels, so it's also small format ferments, exactly the same as the Sir Thomas. And then I go to, this is also 80% new oak. We do a barrel selection, so I choose. When we make up the blends, we go through all the barrels and we sort of choose when I say we, it's basically me and my dad, and then we'll sit down with the family when we do the big blends. But choose the barrels that we think work well as a cab on its own, and then the barrels that will work well in the blend. So it's generally the more, the sort of spicier, greener barrels will go to the blend, where the slightly rounder, juicier barrels will go to the varietal cab. And that's the two reserve grades.
Awesome. Well, we've got quite a bit of chat room action and cell phone action, texting going on about when the hell your Cabernet Francs are going to be available here. We are dying to taste them. So you've got some Francophiles over here for sure.
Sorry?
You've got some Francophiles, some Cab Franc.
Yeah, okay, cool. Awesome. Yeah, so I mean, that's, you know, I don't know why my dad didn't plant it earlier. But yeah, we've planted it. So we planted it 2 years ago. So we've got sort of 2 years before we getting something off of it. Probably 8 years before we sort of getting quality that will go into maybe Cullinan or a varietal cab. But
well, you know, the wine that won the Paris, the Judgment of Paris tasting,
yes.
Those Stag's Leap vineyards were only 5 years old
Really?
at the time of harvest. So you know, you have some options to harvest.
I did not know that. That is an awesome fact. Yeah.
5 years old only. Like it's unreal. Everyone talks about like 7 years being the first time you could collect fruit, but the vineyards that were harvested for that global award wine were only 5 years old. So it's really fascinating. So,
yeah. Okay. Nice. Or maybe sooner then.
Yeah, there you go. I like it. Okay, sounds good. Well, let us know. We're like buying futures as we speak. Your stock is going up. So, well, Chris, thank you so much. I don't want to keep you any later. I know you're in the middle of harvest and it's in the middle of the night for you. So thank you so much for tuning in. We can't wait to see you in Virginia. As soon as you're in Virginia, I'm sure Angela will let us all know, and we're gonna flock to whatever tasting event we have that we can put together for you. So,
awesome. Oh, well, yeah, for me, thanks so much, Kira. Thanks for putting this together. Thanks everyone for joining. Great to see you all. Thank you, Angela.
And if anyone's tasting these wines, just go ahead and tag Remhoogte on Facebook or Instagram to make sure that they get the extra notoriety of the social media stuff that's going on. So we look forward to seeing you again, Chris. And until then,
I can't wait.
Insane. So.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, Kira. Thanks so much. I look forward to seeing you guys over there.
Cheers.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.